we have Dr. Saira. She said I must call you Saira. I'll leave out the last name, Sabzaali. But she's a counselor and also a psychotherapist. She provides mental health support through individual counseling groups, immersive workshop courses, and free educational content. She specializes in depression, anxiety, family harmony, and stress management. Anybody here needs stress management? She has a PhD in transpersonal psychology and has delivered 2 TED Talks. Over the last 14 years, she has helped women and men of many backgrounds find answers to their questions about work, life, love, and meaning. Much mainstream psychology overlooks spirituality, that intersection of faith and family values and community context. And so Dr. Saira stands apart in specializing, serving clients who are ready for change and want to include their cultural values, their spiritual beliefs into therapy. Her team of therapists at the Dragonfly Wellness Center looks forward to having you to feel, to heal, and to grow with grace. Dr. Saira, it's all over to you as you look from the counseling perspective at stress.
Can I start? Are we ready?
Yes,
Great, thank you, thank you. So if we were all in a room together, I'd be able to see everyone and I could just ask you a question and you could put up your hand, but we're not. So I'm going to ask you to type in the chat. So every time I ask a question, type your answer in the chat because that's how I'll know your answers to the question. So the first question is, who here knows someone with dementia or suspected dementia or diagnosed dementia? If that's you, just write yes in the chat. Let's see who's here, who knows. So I would say yes for me. I know a few people in my family with dementia. So let's see those yeses. Have you, do you have a family member, a friend, somebody you know who lives with dementia? Yeah, so there's a few people saying yes. Great. I'm expecting that's why you're here, right? I'm expecting you're here because you want to understand, you want to see how you can support and help the person that you know. And so I'm going to teach you about 3 things today. So the first is a little bit about your brain. The second is a little bit about mental health. And then the third is stress. So those are the 3. And let's start with the brain. So God gave us this brain, but most of us don't really know how it works, right? Like we know that it works, but we don't know how it works. So I want to teach you a really simple way of understanding how your brain works. And you can teach this to your children. It's really simple, but you have to do it with me. So those who are my students, I'll ask you to lead the way. We're going to do this together. So if you take 2 fingers and you tap here in the middle of your forehead, just tap with me and say out loud, this is my captain. This is my captain. This is my captain. Well, God is your captain, but you know, this is your captain. Side here, on the side here. This is my first mate. This is my first mate. This is my first mate. Now, in the back of your head, right under that bump, tap there and say, this is the sheriff. This is the sheriff. This is the sheriff. What does that mean? So the captain is the part of our brain that steers the ship. Right? Long-term planning, goal setting, knowing how to talk to people, noticing the subtleties that are happening around you. That's the captain. The first mate is the part of our brain that's always scanning for danger, looking at the horizon and trying to see what can harm me. And it's a much older and stronger part of the brain than the captain for most of us. And so if you want to know the technical terms, this is the frontal cortex, and then this is what we call the limbic system, which is the emotional part of the brain, scanning for danger. So what happens with the brain, the easiest way to understand it is we see something or we hear something or we even think about something, and it comes to the first mate. Now, the first mate has to decide, is this a tiger that's threatening my life or not? That's basically what its decision is. Is this a tiger threatening my life? Nowadays, a tiger could be something really simple, like getting cut off in traffic and almost getting hit. That could be a tiger. Somebody's dirty look could be a tiger, right? So the tigers of today are very different than the tigers of our ancestors, but it decides, is this a tiger? If the first mate decides, yes, this is a tiger, then it sends the information back to the sheriff. Now, you might have heard the word fight or flight, right? The fight or flight or the survival brain. So that's the sheriff. That's the part of our brain that's just trying to keep us alive. That's its only job, is to keep us alive. And so when the sheriff wakes up, everybody else moves to the side and you're either fight, flight, or freeze is what we call it. So fight would mean in today, we might not physically fight, we might fight with words. So have you ever had that situation where you're in an argument and then you say something and you say, oh, I can't believe I said that? That's because it was the sheriff speaking. And the sheriff can't control. The sheriff just wants to push the other person away. Or some people give the silent treatment, right? They walk away, they run away, or they shut down. So that would be flight. And then freeze. So in the old, back when there were tigers for us to worry about, first you would check it out, see if you could fight the tiger. If the tiger was too big, now you're going to run from the tiger. If the tiger catches you, now you're going to play dead so that not too much damage happens to you as the tiger's trying to eat you. So that's the freeze response. So that's what happens when the sheriff's in charge. And so what chronic stress does is it strengthens the relationship between the first mate and the sheriff. Let me say that again. What chronic stress does is it strengthens the relationship between the first mate and the sheriff. What that means is you're scanning the world and you're interpreting things as tigers that are not tigers. Or you're having your own thoughts and you're interpreting those thoughts as tigers that are not tigers. And so stress creates more stress, creates more stress. When the stress response is activated in the brain, we get this big dump of hormones in our body. And those hormones create the physical environment for us to fight the tiger. So what does that look like? Our heart starts beating really fast. Our digestion stops. Our reproductive system just kind of goes on pause if there's anything happening there. Our arteries constrict. We get really focused. We can only focus on one thing. Blood glucose, glucose levels go up in the blood. So extra energy in the blood, which over time can create belly fat. So these are all the things that happen when you have this constant activation of stress in your body. So I wanted to start with the brain so that you kind of understand what's happening when we're stressed, because everybody uses that word, I'm stressed, I'm stressed. Well, what does it really mean? So what it means is that my brain is in fight or flight mode and I'm getting these unnecessary hormones flooding through my body that I don't know what to do about. Now, you can train your brain to do it differently. And that's what therapy helps with. And actually prayer can help with that too, right? So you can actually change your brain to not be as reactive, but it takes an effort. It doesn't just happen because you wish it. You have to work at that. So that's the first one, your brain. Number two is mental health. So you've probably heard the words mental health. I'm going to show you this image here. So this is what we call the mental health continuum. Now, the mental health continuum, can you see it? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it? Okay, thank you, Marie. So the mental health continuum is a different way of looking at mental health. So just like everybody has physical health, and sometimes you're well and sometimes you're unwell, in the same way, everyone has mental health, right? So you can be well or you could be less well, whether or not you have a mental illness. So a mental illness is a diagnosed condition like depression or a clinical depression or generalized anxiety disorder, etc. There's all these different mental illnesses. So you can have poor mental health without having a mental illness. That's really, really important to understand. And that's why I really like this continuum model. So if you look at the left side, that's the green zone. So that's where we want to be. That's when we're feeling pretty healthy. So when we're feeling healthy, it's normal functioning, normal fluctuations in mood, normal sleep patterns. We are physically and socially, sorry, I have to look over here because it's here on my screen. So I'm not ignoring you. I'm just looking over here. We have a good sense of humor when we're in the green zone. We have good energy levels. And we don't really use substances to get away from our problems. We're just kind of enjoying our lives. When we're in the green zone, things are fine. Now, when something stresses us out or some event happens, we move into the yellow zone. So the yellow zone is when we're reacting. So that looks like a little bit irritable or impatient, might feel a little nervous, maybe feeling a bit sad or overwhelmed. This is when we start becoming sarcastic. So our humor kind of becomes more cutting against other people. We can forget things, we can procrastinate, we're having trouble sleeping. Now, you might be wondering, okay, well, what does this have to do with dementia? I don't understand the link. Well, let me tell you this. The people on this call, I'm expecting, are here because you want to learn about how to support someone with dementia, right? And if you don't know about mental health and what it looks like, you won't know if they're okay, and you also won't know if you're okay. So that's why we do this. And one of the things I love about this continuum is it gives us a way to look out for each other. So when I speak to my faith community about this, I talk about how we have to watch and make sure that we're staying in the green. And if people start going into the yellow, going into the orange, that's when we reach out, right? As brothers and sisters, and we have that conversation. How are you doing? You seem not yourself today, right? And have those reach out, because a lot of people will just suffer in silence when they're going through a hard time. You might be one of those people, but if we have that community, that caring, loving faith community, well, that's the place for us to connect with each other and look after each other, right? So yellow. Orange, that's when things are getting worse. So in the green and the yellow, we can do with kind of our own social supports, going to turning to family, the church, or other places that would feel a sense of community. But once you're starting getting to the orange and the red, now it's actually, you might need some professional care, because now you have this hopelessness that doesn't go away. You have a negative attitude. At work, you're kind of showing up, but you're not really there, right? You're kind of there, but you're not really there, or you're becoming a workaholic and you can't stop working. Sleep, your sleep will be affected. You can't sleep. You might have nightmares, increased pain and fatigue in the body. Oh, here's a really interesting thing. So with people, communities of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, what happens is, because mental health is still somewhat stigmatized, a lot of the times we won't see the psychological signs. We'll actually see physical signs and symptoms. So people will say, I just have headaches all the time. Or they'll say, my back is hurting all the time. And the doctors will say, well, there's nothing wrong, right? Or leg pain is another one, unexplained leg pain. So there's different things that we need to look out for when we're helping each other, rather than just the basic things that maybe mainstream psychology talks about. And that's called, there's a word for that. It's called psychosomatizing. When we take like a psychological, emotional problem and turn it into something physical. We don't do it on purpose, but it happens all the time. And so that starts happening in the orange zone. We might avoid our friends and family. We might start using alcohol or gambling or any other those kind of negative coping mechanisms to work through our problems. And then there's the red zone. The red zone is when we're in an emergency and you really need to seek professional support. You know that if you feel out of control of your emotions, so angry outbursts, uncontrolled crying, maybe having some suicidal thoughts, maybe you're constantly fatigued, you don't answer your phone, you're starting to really avoid people. So when we're in the red zone, and see what happens is most people don't actually seek help until they're in the red zone. But this continuum allows us to say, hey, wait a minute, what if I could reach out way before the red zone? What if I could help others when they're in the yellow zone because I'm catching it, or they're in the orange zone? So that's why I really like that model, and that's why I wanted to share it with you, to get a different sense of mental health. That it's not just about, do you have depression or don't you have? That's not it, right? It's how well are you doing? How are you in the green zone? And giving that language, I think, to communities helps us talk to each other, right? Looks like you're in the orange today. That's all you have to say to people who understand what this model is. This was actually developed by the Mental Health Commission of Canada, specifically for first responders. Again, because there was a lot of stigma in the first responder community around seeking help when they're suffering. And so they're saying, well, no, just let's all get back to the green. And that was the campaign, getting to the green. So I want to share that with this community, and as a gift to you, and please spread it around. You can find it online. If you look up mental health continuum, it's everywhere. And so that's the second thing that I wanted to tell you about. Are you having fun so far? Thumbs up. We're enjoying? Yeah. I always ask my students, like, are you with me? Are you still with me? And I can't see you. So I'm glad I saw the thumbs up. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to tell you about, so I said the brain, mental health, and then the stress cycle. So let's talk about the stress cycle. You might have heard the word burnout. Yeah? people talk about burnout, and it means lots of different things to different people, but this particular stress cycle, Maria and Ajoke, you'll recognize this cycle. You learned it already, and it's something that we teach when we're teaching in our counseling programs. Where as instructors, because and most people don't know it. That's the thing that makes me really passionate about teaching in the world, not just in college, because there's things about the brain, there's things about your emotional life that you should know. That no one ever told you, and if you knew them, you could kind of navigate your life in a different way. You could have more choices, you could feel more kind of in control when these overwhelming feelings come up. So here's the next thing I want to show you. Okay, so that's the mental health. Here it is. So this is called the stress cycle. It's actually Keeley's stress cycle. And this is how it looks. So what happens is at the beginning, we get busy. And those of us who are in leadership positions tend to be busy. And the busier we get, the more people ask of us, because they say, oh, you do such a good job. Can you do this? And can you do this? And can you do that? And we do more and we do more. And so this busyness increases. When the busyness increases, we tend to look after ourselves less. So there's less self-care. And that's when we start feeling that stress. And we also sometimes feel like we can't say no, right? When it's a cause that we're passionate about, especially, it's hard to say no. And so now we're busy, we're stretched, but we're not saying no. So it's all kind of building and building. And it builds, right? It builds and it builds and it builds and it builds until actually we start becoming used to those high stress levels, that hormone dump that's happening in the body. We just think that's normal because it's been happening for so long. And that's when we're here, when you're highly stressed, but you don't feel it. Have you ever met someone who's like, their energy is like, maybe that's like me right now, like their energy is just all over the place. And they're like, and you say, how are you doing? Say, oh, I'm great. But they seem really stressed, but it's like, they don't even know how stressed they are. And so that's what happens here when you're highly stressed, but you're no longer aware of how stressed you are. One of the ways to know if you're there is when you sit quietly, what's happening in your mind, right? Are you in prayer and contemplation and gratitude? Or are the thoughts running and running and running and running and running and running? If that's happening, likely you're highly stressed. And there's ways to change that, but a lot of us live like that and don't even think that we think that's okay. We think that's how we're supposed to live. And I'm here to tell you, we weren't designed like that. We weren't designed to be this stressed out. What happens when you're highly stressed, but you don't feel it, is that some event happens. And I like to call it the straw that breaks you, right? So one thing happens. It can be something small. Like, I'll tell you a story. So here in Canada, we had Halloween. And it's, for those who might not know, it's a kind of this festival where kids go and get candy around the block. And it's kind of like that. So at school, the kids were invited to wear costumes to school. And so people dress up as like a bear or a, I don't know, mailman or something, and they go to school. And I forgot actually about it. And my kids didn't say anything. And so the night before the Halloween party at school, the kids were saying, oh, we have to have costumes. And I thought, oh no, like, all the stores are closed, there's nothing to do. And so I said, what about if you were ninjas? Because the ninja requires black pants, a black shirt, and a black mask. And I had enough of those for my two kids. So I said, maybe you can be ninjas. And that was the straw for me, that when that conversation happened, afterwards I had this big cry because I thought, oh, I'm such a bad mom. I didn't remember Halloween. And my husband was like, it's okay, honey. Like, you're totally overreacting right now. But it wasn't about the costumes, right? It was about all of the other pressure and that buildup before the costume thing happened. So that's what happens. It can be something really small that just, it's too much. And then suddenly we have this meltdown. When we have that meltdown, it's like the rapid decline. And that's when we find ourselves in the red zone in crisis and burnout. So I'm just going to give you a minute to look at this cycle and just kind of think about if you can relate to this, if this has kind of happened to you at some points in your life. And you might remember some periods of your life where the crash was really, really obvious and really, really debilitating, right? And the way the way to kind of move through this is when we're here, when we're starting to get busy. First of all, hold the hand of God, right? Don't try to do all this on your own, because you can't. You simply can't. So one is kind of investing and connecting to your creator as you understand him or her or the creator. That's the first thing, is knowing that you don't have to do it alone, that you have spiritual divine support. Also, I want to just drop in this idea of what's called in the field spiritual bypass. Let me tell you what that means, spiritual bypass. So I see some nods around the room. So what spiritual bypass is, it's something that people, sometimes people who are steeped in their faith may be, they might be susceptible to spiritual bypass. So what it means is when something's wrong, instead of doing anything about it, you say, oh, God will take care of it. And then you just sit back and fold your arms and say, God will take care of it. And you don't do anything. So this is problematic, because while that divine, like, obviously God will take care of it, yes, but God helps those who help themselves. We have to do a little bit on our part as well. So that on our part could look something like telling someone. It could look like, eating properly and getting your exercise and getting good sleep. It could be having to say no sometimes to people, right? So be really mindful that we don't just kind of jump to God will solve it and not take any responsibility or accountability for our part, because we have a part to play as well, right? He gave us this brain, now we have to use it. Now we have to use it, right? So that's the piece around stress. There's a whole, I could go on for 3 days and do a 3-day workshop with you about stress management and burnout, but hopefully that was informative and helpful. And I just want to pause here in case anyone has a question. So if you have a question, you can type it in the chat box, and I'd be happy to answer just 1 or 2 questions if something didn't make sense of what I was explaining. Any questions? Or comments, if you have a comment. So there's one comment. Now, when I think about it, I usually don't realize how stressed I am until I'm alone with my thoughts. Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm avoiding my phone at times, right? Because maybe you just need to say no for a minute. Anyone else with a question or a comment, just type it in the chat. Okay, it looks like we're good. It looks like that everybody feels like they got what they needed from my portion. I really want to thank you, Marie, for inviting me here. I feel so honored to be part of this group, and I'll pass it on to the next presenter.
Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Saira Sabzaali. All right. Are you in the green zone? A very good question, and I just posted this on my WhatsApp status. Are you in the green zone? What does a green zone look like? Normal mood fluctuations, calmness and the ability to take things in stride, a good sense of humor. I have a very corny sense of humor, but at least, I try. They say I'm corny, all my young people. But it's important to try in a time like this to have a light spin. And there's nowhere else in the world like Jamaica that takes everything for a joke. The worst of situations, we have a sense of humor, good performance, being in control, normal sleep patterns, few sleep difficulties, being physically well, having a good energy level, being active. And I heard Doc saying that stress translates down to the belly and can create belly fat. So that's what I'm telling my wife. That's my excuse on it. It was not the late night eating. It's the stress of life that has caused us to put on. But there is a way out. Doc is saying we can retrain our brain like the fighter pilot. We can retrain the brain. Take control of your day. And everybody needs a therapist. Everybody needs somebody to pour out to.
and not